Greetings, fellow fans of Christopher Manson's Maze. This is Bill M. back with another Maze commentary number 22. And in this commentary, I want to talk about Maze rooms number 23 and 8. Also want to talk a little bit about umbrellas, since it's kind of a connecting theme here. Of course, I got to begin with some of the usual recap. So if you are new to this commentary series, please see my older clips for some background on the book, analysis of the 3 different room types, and so on, because I might be using some terms you might be unfamiliar with. And remember, the main challenge of Christopher Manson's Maze is to find the shortest path from room 1 to the center of the maze, that is room 45, and back using the fewest moves. And as the directions say, this is 16 steps. Well, we already know the solution. The publisher revealed it in 1987 after the contest was over, and some of us were able to find it on our own anyway. But it doesn't mean there isn't more to discover from the book. And as I said, this clip is going to go over 2 particular rooms of Maze, rooms number 23 and 8. And of course, there are going to be spoilers in this for sure. And also want to take a brief look at umbrellas. That's one of the recurring items we see around in numerous rooms of Maze. And I'm going to pick up where we left off in commentary number 21. We were leaving room 45. From room 45, we take room 23. First, a little bit about rooms 23 and 28. So these are 2 of the rooms that are on that infamous shortest path from 1 to 45 and back, namely on the way back from 45. In fact, that sequence of room 23 to room 8 appears in all possible passages you can take from room 45 back to 1, excluding the ones that use the loop rooms. So there are, as I said in the previous commentary, lots of different ways to get to 45 from 1. You can possibly take loop rooms, but if you stick with the path rooms, this dual passage, if you will, from 23 to 8 appears in all of them. Now, remember from the directions of the book, it says, some clues may refer to a specific door in a specific room. And as I've said many times, it seems a lot of fans kind of focus on that. Maybe that is the way most clues are put in. But we're also told that clues in a series of rooms may relate to each other and may indicate a path. So my argument here is that because 23 to 8 is a sequence that shows up in all of those non-loop passages from 45 to 1, that could be a strong candidate for one of these examples of clues in a series of rooms might relate to each other. So speaking of the shortest path, I don't want to spend too much time on that, but after you reach room 45, these are the remaining rooms of the shortest path. I've talked about most of them, and I've mentioned, as you can see here on the slide, the different commentary numbers where I talk about these. There are a couple I have not talked about yet, but will in a future one. So with that, let's just move on to room 23. Let's read the dialogue. Room 23. A room with 3 other doors. Looking out the window, my feet crushed something on the floor. Watch your step here, I warned them. I'm always ready to be helpful with the less important things. Look at those 2 trees out there, one said, looking over my shoulder, which is not easy to do. Must be a real wind coming up. Now they realized that it could rain where they were going. We should have brought that bumbershoot with us from the coat room. Which one was that? You remember, the one with the animal? I suggested that we take the door on my right, and they realized they had found the door they had been seeking for so long. The entrance to... Now a closer look at room 23 before we really delve into the clues. So the ending dialogue makes it sound like this is the room leading to 45. After all, it would be the room that they were searching for so long. But, as I mentioned in the previous commentary, there is no way to reach room 23 without having already reached 45. So you can only enter 23 by either taking 45 to 23 directly or going from 45 to 28 to 23. That's it. So my guess is that the author suspected there would be people flipping through the book trying to find rooms leading to 45 and trying to work backwards. And so this was put in there just as it was put into 28 as a kind of a teaser for that, misleading teaser. The dialogue does say a room with 3 other doors, so that implies they arrived from one of them. Well, as we said, it could only be arriving from room 28 or room 45. Now, room 45, where we just came from, itself has exits directly to 28 and 19. So even if you didn't know anything else, it seems like the only new exit here is to room 8, even if you were just trying to study that set of rooms. And as usual, it sounds like the guide wants to mislead the group, wants to mislead them to take 19, saying, no, I suggested they take the door to my right. And there's also some allusions also to it was going to rain where they were going. So it sounds like, you want to go outside. But that is not the correct choice. A little bit more on that later. Now, also in the picture, there's that big scroll that's on the bottom left that says everything right, nothing, the time is. Well, that's related to the riddle. See my commentary number 17 for that. I tried looking for clues, seeing if, the word 8 is in there. Well, kind of, the letters of the word 8 are in the top line and so on. Tried looking for anagrams, but yeah, I couldn't really find anything related to choosing the right door. I'm thoroughly convinced that it is part of the riddle. And again, see my commentary on that for more details. Now, they mention in the dialogue, we should have brought that bumbershoot with us from that room with the animal. Bumbershoot, if you look it up, is a slang term for umbrella. And we are going to talk about umbrellas later in this clip. One more thing, the CD-ROM game, Riddle of the Maze from 1994, as I keep saying, it is a CD-ROM game version of Maze where you get to click on the doors and go through the various rooms, and additionally has in each of the rooms, or at least in most of the rooms, some animated things. And we're told some objects are particularly useful and become alive when you click on them. So just to mention what they are for room 23, I found that the sun and the moon pictures, they animate on their own. The clouds of the moon, the rays of the sun. If you click on the 2 stone tablets, the bolts over 28 animates and you hear thunder. Sometimes in the room also there's like a pat sound, almost like a bat hitting a baseball. You hear that. Well, let's look at some of the proposed clues I've seen for choosing door 8 in room 23. I've heard a lot of people say, the sun is right over 8, and see how it's a sun picture and it's all bright around 8. See how that's lit up like the others, so you take that door. Okay, but my argument against that is that we do see other rooms where we see sun or sunlight, and we see it marking some wrong doors. Now, as far as the pictures above, maybe there's some kind of day and night theme going on here. We see the moon over 45. We just came from there, and that's kind of the end. And, we're starting a new beginning. The sun. So we follow the sun to room 1. There were the 2 suns in room 17. I talked about those in the previous clip. Does that kind of reinforce the sun going back to 1? It's one idea. Now, if you look at the 4 pictures, the foot is pretty damn out of place. It's like, what does that have to do with the weather? It looks like the thing out of Monty Python. Now, usually in a lot of the rooms, you can pick the one door, it seems, that's different from the rest, and that's usually the right one, but that's not the correct choice here, because 19 is probably the worst choice you can make out of all these. It will take you to one of the loop rooms, and you can eventually get back to 1 from there, but it's going to be the longest. So I thought maybe, the foot, like the bare foot over the broken glass, maybe that's more of a symbol of danger that's there. I'll talk a little bit more about that later. I've heard some people argue, well, it's a heel, and heel, like you tell a dog to heel, that means slow down. Okay, but it's more like about obedience, telling a dog to heel. Now, one other clue that I think is interesting, a proposed clue, I've outlined this in blue. Some people have argued, well, if you look at the coat rack, it makes like a perpendicular line with the panel behind it, and that looks kind of like a plus sign. And if you look on either side of that plus sign of the doors, you do see 4 rectangular panels each, and so 4 plus 4 gives you 8. One of the better proposals for a clue that I've seen. Some other possible clues regarding room 23. Well, the dialogue alludes to room 42. Maybe there's a clue in there. I mean, there are pairs in room 42, as we saw in the posters. And there's kind of pairs of things here in this room, but it's kind of a stretch. I am going to talk more about room 42 later, though. One of my initial guesses as to why choose 8, it's like, well, I do see the Roman numeral 8 on the tablets. Okay, but then I realized, okay, it's still kind of weak, not really a convincing thing. Other people have pointed out, well, baseball also has 8 letters. Okay. And again, it's not necessarily that there's one definitive clue. We are told in the directions there are any number of clues in each room to help you pick clues to help you pick the right door in each room. Remember, not necessarily in that room. There's the clues in the series of rooms and all that. So one other argument I've seen, it's like, well, you could do this by process of elimination, even though the odd one out with the foot sign is not the way to go. You could say, okay, well, exit 19, you have the barefoot and over the glass. That's kind of a, indication something bad. Storm out there too doesn't help. You have the storm cloud over 28. So that's kind of bad with the storm too. And we did just come from room 45, even if that's not a storm. So pick 8 out of elimination. One other thing I'd like to propose that I've thought of along the way, we're told, look at the 2 trees out there. There, an anagram for 3. Again, we've seen anagrams show up before in some of the other clues. Over my shoulder, which is not an easy thing to do. Well, looking up over your shoulder, maybe it's kind of raised an exponent because you take 2 to the power of 3, 2 up 3, that's 8. You get that? Again, just ideas that I've had along the way. Let me get to what I think is the most convincing clue, though. Okay, here's what I believe to be the most probable clue, the biggest candidate for a clue that the author put in here to pick door 8. Well, if we look at the gloves, it looks like they're kind of posed in a throwing motion, almost like it's throwing that baseball back. But if we take a overall look at the room from left to right, we see the 2 stone tablets, and to me, they definitely imply the 10 Commandments. So, you have 6 through 10 on the right slab, 1 through 5 presumably on the left. And yeah, I know they're Roman numerals, and some people might say, well, it was Hebrew and not in Roman. Like, yeah. But surely you can look at that and think like, okay, yeah, that brings to mind the 10 Commandments. Now, next to that, we have a pair of gloves. 1 glove and then another glove, a left and a right, 5 fingers on each hand. You might extend this down to the shoes that are below. There are those 2 shoes. Maybe that kind of reinforces the symmetry, 5 toes and 5 toes. But we keep going further to the right. We get a pair of glass doors. And notice we get 5 glass windows on the left door, 5 glass windows on the right door. And we have the broken window that's there. Well, if we look back at the tablets, that matches up with the 8. So you have these 3 sets of objects, the tablets, the gloves, and the double doors, and the hole that's in the window there corresponds with 8. And also the allusion to room 42, got in that bumper chute, the room with the animal. You could say that that implies pairs because that was a theme, but that's kind of a stretch. I think the bottom line is with these 3 items here, I think it's consistent enough to be an intentional clue from the author. So that's my argument. It's, more of Manson's right-brained kind of puzzle work. I've talked about how in Maze, it's not just like Sudoku where it's, a systematic, purely left-brain thing. There's some creativity, some thinking out of the box you need here. Okay, so we pick room 8, we leave room 23 for room 8, and here's what we see. A vaulted chamber lit by a single bulb. Someone knocked a bowl off the table. The crash echoed from the ceiling and whispered away down the corridors. I broke another on purpose. Make sure to take that with you, I said. You can never tell when you might need it. Take what? They wanted to know. Isn't it obvious? Taking a vote among themselves, they went on to... Let's take an overall look at room 8. Well, we've got 4 exits. Exits 12 and 29, those are two-way exits. So if we go to either of those rooms, we'll find an exit back here to room 8. And the only other entrance into room 8 is the one we just took, which is from room 23. So we do see that there is an unnumbered doorway. So that one on the far right with that's underneath the face, that must have been the one from 23 that we came out of. An interesting observation I heard on Mazecast, somebody pointed out that teeth row, which is kind of what we see in that picture, a row of teeth. Well, those words anagram to 2, 3, and 23 is where we came from. Otherwise, I don't know what this picture could mean within this whole context of things. Now, we do see below that a letter S that's taped. I think that and the table, personally, I think that has more to do with the riddle than trying to find your way out of the room. Again, see my 3-part commentary on the riddle for more on that. Now, the other 2 exits, 31 and 6, well, 6 is one of the trap rooms. 31 is one of the loop rooms. We would want to avoid that. 29 is a path room, but you would need to follow the loop rooms in order to get back to 1 from there. So the best exit is actually 12. And again, we know this is the correct exit to take because of the contest with the book and the shortest path and all that. The publisher has confirmed it. And 12 is one of the deja vu rooms. I talked about that in the previous commentary. Now, as for the CD-ROM animations, room 8, here's what I found. If you click on the candlestick, it rolls like towards us, towards the viewer, and then rolls back up towards 29. The bowling pin, if you click on that, there's a weird like pop noise and then a bowling sound, like, a bowling ball rolling down and then pins crashing. If you click on the light switch, the whole room goes completely black. And you got to make sure your mouse was on that same exact position because you got to click the same exact position in the dark to switch it back on. And this is the same kind of thing we saw in room 35 in the CD-ROM game. The single bulb, if you click on that, turns the lights on and off. And now to go through some clues that I've heard or read and some I've thought of myself. The problem with this is, that you have all these objects, and unfortunately that means there are a lot of crazy speculations that happen, a lot of ways to try to rationalize getting 12 and try to find a supposed clue that might not necessarily be a clue. When I first read proposed answers for how to pick 12, how would you know to pick 12? The clue I heard proposed was, well, it's the one of the highest elevation. The room's tipped and you want to get up to the top. Okay, but why? And how does that explain the other objects and stuff in the room? I've also heard, well, there's a bowling theme here because, there are the bowls and those crash and it's described as echoing down the hallway and you see a bowling pin. So it's like you're at a bowling lane. It's a theme of bowling. And the way that relates to 12 is because to bowl a perfect game, you would have to bowl 12 strikes. Okay, but this was a criticism that was brought up on Mazecast in one of the articles I read part of several commentaries ago. And that is, are you sure that this is really a way that the author would try to encode the word 12? Because, even if we assume that bowling was meant to be the theme, even if there was nothing else in the room but a sign that said, hey, bowling is the theme, trying to get 12 from that is still kind of a stretch. If you think of like all the possible ways somebody could try to convey the number 12, why something like that, a number that's not really associated with bowling? Likewise, I've heard people try to count rings around the bulb base. They say, like, oh, it's one, and this kind of looks like two. Some people have said, well, look at the light switch positions. The light's on, but if you look closely in the book, the switch is down, and 1, 2 from that. Some of these ideas, again, more plausible than others. We'll be talking more about those later. I've also heard it proposed that the room is supposed to represent the Earth. It's tilted because the Earth is tilted, and it's almost at that same exact number of degrees, both the room and the axial tilt. And there's a barber pole here. Well, that's like the Earth's pole that runs from the north down to the south through the center. The bulb up in the sky, well, that's the sun. And, well, daytime is 12 hours of the day. So take x of 12, or the solar year is 12 months, so therefore 12. Okay, but if you're going through all of that to try to justify 12, couldn't you just as well argue, well, 6 months of the light at either pole, where next to the pole, is 6 months, so we should take x at 6. Again, it's this problem of being able to rationalize almost anything if you don't really understand much of the book and you're willing to run away with things. Speaking of which, as for that sign that's in the lower left corner that has the word sign written in it, if you go to intotheabyss.net, one person, it was even voted as one of the best answers, which I don't get. Somebody says, well, in mathematics, there's an SGN function, the sign function. See, that I is kind of out of place, so you remove it, and you get SGN, which returns, -1 if the number that you're operating on is negative, 0 if it's 0, or 1 if it's positive. And you would take sine of X, and, well, that bowling pin next to it looks kind of like the I, too. So you get I, and X, and then you rearrange that to get XII, which is Roman numeral 12. I don't buy this at all. At all. I think this is just some really bizarre way to try to get 12 out of that. And yeah, I don't buy it. Other people I've heard propose, well, there are these things that have to be picked upright to use. You pick up the umbrella, you got to pick it up and open it to use it. You got to pick up the barber pole and hang it upright so that you get customers. You got to set up the bowling pins after they're knocked down. You got to set the table upright. You got to set a candlestick upright. Therefore, up. We want to go up to 12. Okay. Again, not as crazy as the math sign thing, but okay. I have a few more slides of observations to share about room 8. Like I said, the fact that there are all these objects in the room, well, that makes it easy to come up with all sorts of speculations about clues. So what follows in the next few slides are more observations I've read or that I've come up with myself. I am by no means saying that these are all equally valid or even all worth considering. I will get to a proposed clue that I think is the most likely candidate, what was most likely intended by the author. If you want to skip ahead to that, fine. Again, though, as long as I'm making a video about room 8, this room that I've spent hours and hours and hours examining over the course of years, I just want to share my speculations in this video for better or worse. So let's continue. Now, the verb take is repeated near the end. Make sure to take that with you. And taking a vote among themselves. I don't know if the two are related, but another observation I'm throwing out there. As I said about the CD-ROM game, the candlestick is one of the items you can click on. And to me, the rolling back and forth kind of points out that it hasn't rolled down to the bottom with the other items because its sides, which kind of act like two wheels, are perpendicular to the slant. So maybe there's something to say about a safe position in the upper part of the room. Of course, one could also argue that the candlestick is ready to roll on to safety into exit 29, which is not where we want to go. So go figure. Another idea, of course, is process of elimination, a theme which we've seen in other rooms. Some fans have proposed that, well, taking a vote among yourselves, take a vote, that's the same as taking a poll, and P-O-L-L, poll, sounds like P-O-L-E, poll, and we have the barber pole there. Again, not the first pun we've seen in the book. And then there are references to the light bulb, which is above 29, and then the bowl in front of 31. So the only room we haven't referred to by objects is room 12. Or maybe you could argue that exits 31 and 6 have stuff in front of them. Exit 29 is a light switch in front of it. 12 is plain, so take that. But I think that's a little more too simple to be an intended clue. I think, if anything, if we want to go by process of elimination, the first one that relates it back to things in the dialogue seems a little more probable. One object I have not talked about yet is this poster on the floor. This clown or jester character looks like Pulcinella. I had one person ask me in my comments, well, how do you know it's Pulcinella? I said, well, it sure as fuck isn't Krusty the Clown. And the sarcasm went over her head, unfortunately. But seriously, if you go look up some basic information on Pulcinella, this is a comedic clown sort of character from the 1700s or so, usually with those kind of characteristics you see here, like the humpback, the crooked nose, like the ruffles, the tall hat. And it seems he's usually conveyed as a delinquent or a thief in a lot of these comedic tropes. And here he is running away with a parasol. And I'm going to talk more about this poster in the very last slide in this clip. But umbrellas, as I said, are a recurring theme in Maze, and I'm going to talk about that later as well. More crazy observations and speculations I've had. Again, just sharing them here for the sake of completion. I mentioned that in the CD-ROM game, clicking on the light switch makes the light turn on and off. And it's the same with clicking on the bulb in room 35. So I thought, okay, the CD-ROM game is telling us that the light is important in both rooms. Are there any other things the two rooms might have in common? I see that room 8 is an angled room, and room 35, well, it has that angled couch because it's broken on one side. The exit in 35 is nearer the upper part of the couch. Does that tell us that the exit in room 8 is the upper part? Go higher. I also see that the 3 couch cushions in room 35, well, they're split up with 1 on one side and 2 on the other, a reference to 1, 2, 12. There's also a matchbook in the bottom right corner of 35. It's hard to see that without the book. But there's also the candle in room 8. Is there a connection there? I don't know, but let's get back to room 8. We've seen that in some rooms there are objects whose names we take and can make anagrams from. So I do have to wonder if, say, like that sign in the corner that has the word sign written on it and the bowling pin, does that give you anagrams? S-I-G-N, P-I-N? Well, you can rearrange the letters, and I got the word sniping, but it doesn't seem to fit anything or really help us. I also wondered, hey, there's a bowl and a bowling pin and a candle. Maybe it means candlepin bowling? Again, something that came to mind, but then didn't go much beyond there because it doesn't seem to help. Well, how about the tilt of the room? I mean, it's the only room that's drawn like this. Maybe it's an important idea here in the room. Well, we are in room 8, and if we were to tilt a figure 8 a full 90 degrees, we would get an infinity symbol. There are a couple of those around Maze, I think. I know that Into the Abyss has maps of the different groups of rooms in Maze, and they argue that the path rooms form a figure 8. And I've seen other fans say, oh, it's so beautiful. It was obviously designed that way. And to that I say, no, not necessarily, because there are numerous other ways you could rearrange the same mapping without overlap and get something else, including some configurations that actually put the center of the maze, as it's called, room 45, in the center of the map. But that is a whole other endeavor. I am actually working on my own maps for Maze, and I will eventually share those in a clip, I'm sure. But anyway, let's try to finish up with room 8. Well, as you can see, there are all sorts of crazy ideas I've had on room 8 at some point or another, but let me try taking my own advice that I try to give in most of these clips of mine, which is, okay, stop thinking in terms of the endless rabbit hole ideas. Come on, Bill, take a step back and think, okay, if I were Christopher Manson, if I were writing the book Maze, and I wanted to encode this room in a clue, how might I do that? Let's say specifically with the number 12. How would I put a clue in here that a reader might be able to interpret as 12? Well, mathematically, 12 does have a lot of factors. You can use 2, 3, 4, to a lesser extent 6, being like really common factors. So you can find rooms that have, that many objects or that many letters and words and stuff like that. But another way to think of 12 is something that's pretty common, like if we saw an egg carton in the room, or a donut box, or a clock face, or a calendar. These sorts of things indicate 12, right? 12 of something. I did notice that there's a bowling pin here and a bowling pin in room 18. And room 18 is that room with the musical notes over the doors. And in music, there are 12 notes of the chromatic scale. 12 unique notes in an octave. So I thought maybe that's a clue for 12. Maybe that's why the bowling pin is in both rooms. Maybe. But again, doesn't seem too convincing to me. Well, what about the word 12 or another similar word like dozen? Maybe there's a way to get that, like from an anagram of other things in the room. Well, I tried. Unfortunately, I don't see a Z, for example, in the dialogue, so I don't think dozen would be encoded here, at least not as a word. The word 12 would require a V and a W for anagrams, and I tried playing around with some of the words in the text or the objects to see if I would get anywhere with that. For V, well, okay, there's the word vote. For a W, well, there's the word bowl. There is a physical bowl in the room. So I tried going down that avenue. Yeah, I noticed door 12 anagrams to voted lower. Playing around with words like that, I didn't really get far, is the bottom line. What are some other ways, though, to express 12? Well, there are the Roman numerals, XII. Once again, I didn't really see anything that looks like an author would have encoded X, I, and I in a discoverable way. What about viewing 12 as the numerals 1 and 2? Well, here we get into a number of proposed clues I've seen from fans. The light switch goes on and off. That's kind of a 1-2. I noticed the first paragraph refers to a single bulb, and the second paragraph talks about 2 bowls breaking. I also realized that the dialogue says, I broke another on purpose. Well, you could take that to mean I broke another on purpose. I broke 1 too. 1 TOO or 1 TWO in this case. Another thing I noticed is that the table, well, that only sits 2 people because of the extra legs. So instead of 1 table for 4, it's 1 table for 2, 1, 2. And finally, just to share with you my craziest idea that came to mind, there was talk about the sign that had the word sign in it. When I think of signs in mathematics, I don't think of SGN sign, but rather the trigonometry function sine, S-I-N-E. That's a function used specifically on angles. We're here in an angled room, and I figured, well, the angle of the room looks close to 30 degrees, and the sine, S-I-N-E, of 30 degrees is 1/2, or 1/2. That's 1, 2. Get a 12 out of that. Again, crazy idea I had, and it's doubtful the author purposely put that in as a clue, to encode 12. But come on, be honest. Is it any less crazy than that answer that's voted at the top near on intotheabyss.net saying that the SGN of X gives you XII that way? Yeah. Now, finally, another item in the poster is a stethoscope. What on earth does a stethoscope have to do with anything here? Anything about doctors or hearts or health here? No, but I would argue it is an item that splits 1 into 2. And I'll talk more about that on the final slide. Are you one of those people who stopped listening to what I was saying and you skipped ahead to this part of the clip? Well, that's okay if you did. Let's continue anyway. Let's move on to umbrellas, which is something I said I wanted to talk about. In the text of room 23, which we took before we got to room 8, they say, we should have brought that bumbershoot with us. Well, a bumbershoot is a slang term for an umbrella, and there are several umbrellas in the book Maze, as you've probably noticed. There is the one in room 8, of course. There is the one in room 42, the room with the animal, as it's referred to, the stuffed bear. That's, the umbrella they were referring to in the dialogue in room 23. There is an umbrella in the prologue picture of the book, and finally there is an umbrella in room 10. Now, is there any special significance to all of these? Are they all good omens? Well, I don't know. I know that they don't necessarily point to the correct door to take. In room 8, for example, it's not pointing to the correct door. And some argued, well, you can't see the end point of the umbrella because it's hidden under a table leg. Okay, true, but also in room 42, we have an umbrella sitting between two doors, and neither of those is the correct door. Now, granted, in room 10, it is pointing to the correct door. One of these days I'll talk about room 10. But finally in the prologue, well, there's nowhere to go forward but onward to room 1, so I don't see how the umbrella really applies here. Now, one of my earliest clips of Maze, I brought up the topic of umbrellas just as an example of ways you can make endless speculations about an object. Speaking of which, MazeCast once did an hour-long pondering on umbrellas in Maze. You can search for that on YouTube. As for what they conclude, well, nothing all that definitive, unfortunately. They also talk about Room 18, and in my commentary from Room 18, I correct some of the things that they say about music theory and so on. But getting back to umbrellas, along with umbrellas, we also have recurring themes in the book about raining or sunshine. Are they connected? Once again, though, I don't see a lot of consistency. There are some rooms where suns or sunlight may point to a good door, or they may point to a bad door. Another possibility, of course, is that the umbrellas are not necessarily connected at all. I do, however, believe that the umbrella reference in room 23 to the one in room 42 and the umbrella in room 8 are in fact related. We know for a fact that the group went through room 42 by the time they reached 23. It is impossible to reach room 23 from the beginning of the book without going through room 42. And it is the only umbrella in the room that also... It is the only umbrella room that also has an animal in it. That's what 42 is. So I have no doubt that in the dialogue of 23, they are referring to the umbrella in room 42. So forget about the umbrellas in room 10 and the umbrella in the prologue, for now. Let's get to the final slide. Okay, this is the most convincing clue I have seen for room 8. Once again, remember that the directions say clues in a series of rooms may relate to each other and may indicate a path. Well, we just came from room 23, where the gloves in, the baseball were, and where somebody says we should have taken that umbrella from room 42. And here we are in room 8 next. We're told to take something obvious. Well, the poster on the floor shows Pulcinella next to a stethoscope. Pulcinella kind of rhymes with umbrella, holding a parasol, which he probably stole, and a stethoscope splits one sound into two. Therefore, the combined text of the connected rooms plus the poster and the dialogue in this room as well, telling us to pick up the umbrella and go to 1-2, go to 12. Now, if you have a better idea of what the poster means and think it means something completely different, then by all means, share it with the class. Go give me a comment. Otherwise, I have no idea what else the stethoscope could mean here. Now, also remember I said The only other ways you can get into room 8 is by coming in through room 12 or through room 29. Room 12 talks about being afraid to go down a dark hole. Room 29 has candles in it. There are candles in front of a blind man, which is a whole other paradox we can lose ourselves in, but let's not do that. My point here is that it is possible that you could come into room 8 the wrong way. You could come in from one of the other rooms. And if that's the case, you would not know the guide is talking about taking the umbrella here. If anything, you might think the quote-unquote obvious thing to take with you is the candle, which doesn't help, of course, unless you also picked up the matches, say from room 4, the matches in room 35. But continuing on with this idea, the other exits you could take from room 8, besides 12 and 29, are rooms 6 and 31. Room 6, as I said, is a trap room, and it's that room that has the cave, or it's like a mine. It's rainy, it's dark, so going there without an umbrella or a candle is a bad idea. And room 31 is a loop room, the courtyard room with the bone tree, and, well, that room seems dark and cold and windy. Well, maybe I'm stretching things too far with room 6 and 31 here, but the bottom line is that that's my main argument. So far as I can tell, the best candidate I've seen for a clue in room 8 to pick the correct door of 12 is this poster and the reasoning I gave of the connected rooms in the dialogue. Well, that concludes my exhaustive commentary on room 8, a room that confounded me and still has some things I haven't found answers for, but also my commentary on 23, as well as umbrellas for now. Thank you all for listening. Let me know what you think in the comments, and please give this clip a like if you got something out of it. We'll see you in the next commentary. Bye.